Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist and I love to use mixed media. I share a lot of my process and material reviews here on my channel, and at Christmas I received something new. So I got this little ArtGraf tin which is watercolour graphite. I have tested some graphite blocks before, which I'll talk to you about later, and I'm going to compare them, but I'm really excited to test this out. I've seen a lot of artists use this really well, and so I want to see how I can incorporate it in my work. We're going to be doing lots of experiments and playing today. I'm going to see how this works alongside other mediums as well as on its own with lots of different tonal studies, and I'll be doing a final illustration at the end using just this one medium. So whether you've already got this in your stash and you're not sure how to use it, or you've been thinking of buying it, I hope this is helpful. Let's get on with the video. Okay, so this is the ArtGraf that I've got. This is the 20-gram little tin. You can also get it in 60 grams. You can also get a putty version, and they also do these blocks, which I'll put on the screen as well in different colours. But this is the one that I received for Christmas. So it comes in a little tin like this. So I think this would be really easy to take with me if I wanted to go really minimal with my supplies, which if you know me, you'll know that's not likely. But I do like how small this is, so it would be great for like my plein air sketching kit. So this is what it looks like. It's a little bit loose in there. It's got this typography on that's been printed on there, which obviously is going to disappear as I put my brush in it because it is water soluble. But it's also definitely graphite. You can already see that coming off on my finger, so it could be a little bit messy, but I like that it's contained in the tin compared to like the putty or just a block on its own. I want to test this out with different mediums. I want to see how things layer on top. But I also want to see the range of tone I can get with this, and I will be doing a tonal study as I mentioned in the intro. One of the other things I want to compare it to is this, which is the Derwent XL graphite. So I got these blocks last year, and these ones I do have in different colours, but I also want to see how it compares to the two at the bottom, which are just solid graphite. So I tend to use these as sticks, and I can get lots of different marks with these, whereas obviously I can't do it so much with the tin. So I just want to see how it compares in terms of just wetting my brush on this versus wetting my brush on this. So what I'm going to do is start in my sketchbook, and then we'll just do some experimenting and play. I always recommend doing that with new supplies anyway, because it really helps you learn what the medium can do. Okay, so I've got a pot of water here, and I'm just going to start by wetting this. I'm just using a mop brush at the moment, and I want to see, just putting it down. Oh, that's really easy to come up. You can get lots of different marks there depending on how much water you use. Let's see if we can blend this out. Nice. Okay, yeah, so it does work quite similarly to the other. Let's see just how dark I can get this. So I still need water on my brush to be able to get it up, but that's pretty black. That's really nice. And then a really light one next to it. And then basically that's just water. I'm just doing these tests in my Royal Talons, so it's on ivory toned paper. Obviously, depending on the brush you use, you can get really thin marks or thicker ones. And I think you can really play with your tones. So that's obviously what this is all about, and I think it'll be really fun to play with that later. You can also get some really nice effects, sort of like dry brush effects, which is really nice. You can see there, that's a really nice texture where I've let the brush dry out a little bit, so that's really fun to play with as well. So what I'm going to do next is just put down some blocks of this so I can see how things layer on top, as well as putting down some blocks of paint to see how this layers on that. One thing I will note is that it is making my water quite dirty quite quickly. I wonder if water brushes would work well if you're working outside, just because I will now need to go and rinse my water pot and get a whole new fresh water before I add on my paint. So it does dirty the water pretty quickly because obviously it is graphite. So because this is graphite, it doesn't really set, so I'm pretty sure this is completely dried now, but if I wet my brush, I'm able to pick it back up again. This is a medium similar to gouache in that it is water soluble, so you can re-wet it, so I do have to be careful what I put on top. But the other good thing about graphite is that I can rub it away. So I've just grabbed an eraser here, and I want to see how that works. Okay, so it's kind of smudging it. You can see it's kind of making it really shiny. Let's see if it works with a smaller eraser. Okay, yeah. It is getting down to the paper. This is probably not the best paper, and I've put it down quite thickly, but that could definitely work, especially down here on the side where it's a bit thinner. you can erase away. So that's a really interesting technique. You can kind of do little shapes and things and take it away rather than add to. So that could be interesting to play with. I think that definitely works better on the thinner, where it's a bit thinner, because there's just so many layers here, and it is quite messy as well. So you can see on my eraser it has picked up a lot of those graphite shavings. Okay, so over here on this one I just want to see how Neocolor and pencils layer. So I'm pretty sure there won't be much difficulty. Where it is thick, actually it isn't laying over that well. Maybe it's because it's so shiny underneath. So that's quite a bright colour, and it obviously dulls it. And then a blue. Yeah, the colour's not really showing through, so that's quite interesting. And then I'll just grab some pencils. So I've got a white drawing pencil. That feels like it's not laying on top, it's kind of interacting. It's looking whiter on the camera, but you can see that's just the shine. It's kind of laying on top, but it's not laying pigment. And it is smudging it a little bit, so that's really interesting. This is really helpful. I really enjoy doing these tests because it teaches me how I can use them later on in my sketchbook. I'm just going to grab a blue as well. Yeah, the colour isn't showing up at all, so I don't think it works really as a base. I think it would work alongside these things, but probably it would work better on top rather than underneath. So you can see there, it's not making any colour at all, it's just kind of pushing the graphite that's already there around, and it's definitely just made it darker. So the Neocolors work better than the pencils, but I wouldn't say that a coloured pencil works on top. If I was to grab a dark pencil, I've got a dark indigo here, that works much better because it's darker than the sort of dark grey graphite that's already underneath, and I'm not trying to change the colour of it. So the pencils can go on top, but you're not going to get much colour unless you're using a darker tone. So that's been very helpful. Now I'm just going to put some paint on top to test that theory with some wet mediums. Okay, so I've got some gouache. As I said earlier, this is water soluble just like the gouache, so I'm going to test this out, but it will pick up the graphite underneath. So it's similar to when you're putting water on top of gouache, it could reactivate. So there's my pure yellow gouache. And then if I scrub it a little bit, it's picking up the graphite. So that's definitely something to think about if you are using gouache on top. It will just pick it up underneath. So it does work. It does change the colour. It's creating this green because it's black and yellow, and there's usually a lot of colour in black. So it's something to play with if you wanted different textures, but if you wanted pure colour, then gouache isn't it. So let's test it with the acrylic. So this is quite a sticky acrylic, but let's do the same. So there's the pure blue. This is ultramarine blue. And then I'm just going to wet it a little bit and put it next to it. So again, the colour isn't as strong and it's not picking up as much, but I think it would do because it is still water soluble. Yeah, there we go. So that's quite nice. You can just have the graphite and a colour and create lots of different tones from it by using the graphite as your black. So using that as your colour to create different tones. So we can have this pure blue, this blue, and then a darker blue depending on how much you scrub it into the page. But again, unless it's super thick on top, it's just not going to show that colour. So let's do the opposite of that and try it on top of the paint that I've put down. So this is gouache, so if I just scrub it here, you can see the colour's already coming up, and that was dry. So it will be similar with the test above, but I think this will work better because I have put down obviously the gouache first. So because it is black, it's showing up really nicely. You can still, it kind of feels like I can be careful with the layer on top if I'm not scrubbing it in too much. But if I wanted to, let's try it here. Yeah, again, we can create all those different textures and the different tones. So for me, if you're going to do it this way, I would put down the gouache first, or your paint layer first, and then use the ArtGraf on top rather than the other way around. I think it works a lot better this way. And again, you can create different tones here, so you can create that sort of gradient effect. But I think it works better having that down first. And then we'll do the same on the acrylic. So this won't bring up the colour underneath. So this works better for something like this. So it's not super black when it's on this. You can see it's kind of coming out quite shiny. That's because of the nature of graphite. So it's really interesting how different colours laid on top changes the tone. But if I scrub here, yeah, it's just coming out graphite again. So it's not picking up the acrylic underneath, but I'm still able to get different tones. But for textures, I think the gouache works really nicely. And it's not super black on top. So if I was to use the dark indigo, you can see I can get a really dark tone there. And this makes the graphite, which originally looked very dark, look really silver and a mid-tone, or maybe even a light tone. So here it's still quite wet, but that's really interesting. So over here, obviously on the yellow, it was our darkest tone, but here on the blue, it's our mid to light tone. So I found that very helpful. It obviously won't pick up the acrylic underneath, but I do find this useful for me to play around with. So now I want to compare it to the graphite blocks, because I want to see if you've got the graphite blocks, do you need to buy the ArtGraf? Okay, so here's my tin of the graphite. So I'm going to use this darkest one here and compare it to the ArtGraf. So with these I can get different marks because I can take it out. Now with the ArtGraf, I could take it out, but there's not really any point because I wouldn't necessarily use this as a mark making tool. I'd mostly just use this to add water to. But that's a definite benefit for these ones because I can use them for mark making like this, just on their own, and then sort of smudge it out, which I wouldn't necessarily be able to do without a brush with the ArtGraf, although I could definitely just put my finger in there and then smudge it, but it's not as strong. It's a little bit harder to bring up. If I just rub my finger on the graphite block, that brings up quite a lot. And then this one, obviously I have put water on this, but this is the ArtGraf. Probably a little bit lighter in tone. I would say this is smoother than the block, so it's easier to get the pigment up on that. They are quite messy, and if you were to create this, it probably would need sealing. So I will leave a link to the Derwent graphite video that I filmed where I was testing out all of the different blocks in this set. So I'll leave that linked in the cards and up above, but it would need sealing because this is still quite movable. So let's test this out with water now. I think the ArtGraf is better for taking out and about, and it's definitely neater in the little tin than just having a loose block. But I want to see just how pigmented I can get these. So this is the ArtGraf, and I'm just going to do a little gradient down. It's quite messy, but that's fine. And then this is the XL Graphite block by Derwent. So to me that's a bit blacker. It's definitely darker. I mean, they are very, very similar. Let's wait for that to dry and then we can see. But I would say at this point, they are very similar. You probably wouldn't need both unless you wanted something that you can take out and about with you. I really do like the format of the tin. It does keep it quite neat. I would say actually, I think the ArtGraf is drying a lot quicker. I can see this is already dried. Obviously where I added more water it isn't, and this is definitely taking a little bit longer. It's getting there. It's obviously not the most scientific experiment because I can see the marks here, so let's just do a few more tests. This is in the sketchbook that I use just for experimenting, so I generally have one that's a lot lower pressure for material tests and things like this. So let's try and make as smooth a colour as possible. I do think the ArtGraf is sinking into the paper a bit quicker, so it's drying quicker. You do get more block, because obviously it is one solid block compared to a thinner tin. It goes down darker, but I think it dries the same tone as the ArtGraf. I feel like there's more texture here. It's a little bit more difficult to make smooth compared to the ArtGraf. I mean, on the face of it, just looking at the camera, they look the same. I do think that the ArtGraf is drying a little bit quicker. And if we go back here, you can definitely see there's more texture. They're pretty similar. I wouldn't say there's much of a difference. So this is the ArtGraf. This is the Derwent. So let's test this out. So I just want to see the smudginess. Okay, so you can see the shine there where I'm kind of burnishing off the top layer of the graphite above. a little bit of smudging, not a huge amount, and then the Derwent. Oh, it's interesting. Okay, so I'm getting more off from the Derwent, so it feels like this one's getting fixed more, and I'm also not burnishing off as much. That is interesting. So there is a difference there. It feels like the ArtGraf sets better, and it does act more like when you're scrubbing a graphite pencil and you're getting that shine. Not so much on the Derwent, and I can see a difference in the paper. So this is sitting on the paper as a layer, even though it felt like it was drying quicker. This is definitely scrubbing the paper a little bit more. There's a little bit of pilling. It's just going to be tricky to show you on the camera, but that is interesting. So I feel like that's set much better than the Derwent graphite. Okay, so I don't think there's any point doing the layering test. They will be the same. They're both water soluble. They both act very, very similarly, but I would say the smudge test, this one smudges more. This one feels a little bit more secure, but it still does come up. It's not like it's completely set, like you'd still need to fix it with a spray fixative, but I want to do a tonal study now. So this has been really helpful in knowing how it works, and now I want to create a piece of art with it. So I don't do tonal studies very often, and it's not something that you usually see on my channel, but I think it will be really interesting to do. So I'm going to show you the process now and talk to you about my feelings about the ArtGraf. Just before I get onto the tonal study, I did just want to do an overview of the pages I created just then, so you can really see the different tones and the textures, especially now it's all dried. The coloured pencils are showing up a little bit better, but it's definitely not the best way to show the colours of the pencils because the graphite is so dark. You can really see here on the texture of the ArtGraf versus the Derwent. I thought that was really interesting how it dried, so something to keep in mind and maybe test out a little bit more later on. So here is what I'm working in. This is my Rome sketchbook. I started this back in September when I went to Rome, and I'm determined to at least get halfway. So that's been my plan for January, and it's going really well. I used a reference that I took on my trip of the Roman Forum, so there's plenty of interest in this, and I really wanted something that had different tones. What I did before I started this piece was actually turned it black and white, and that's really helpful. I find that that works really well to be able to understand what's going on in the picture, especially when doing a tonal study. So if you're wanting to do this too, I really recommend that. I think it really helps me to see where the darkest points are, and just to really have a play with this medium, just to be able to build up the different layers. So I did start with a sort of light base and then worked on top. I'm using quite a bit of water here and also smudging with my finger, but the textures are really, really lovely. I really enjoyed playing around with that, and I'm just using the one brush. So this is a round brush, and I'm playing around with lines as well as the textures. So I really enjoyed working this way. It is different to normal. I generally just put down my colour block first and then go on top with details. But it was nice to work a little bit slowly and also play with some wet on wet textures, so where I didn't allow for it to dry and then went over the top, and then having to troubleshoot because I didn't get the sharpness I wanted because it wasn't dry underneath. But it was a really helpful page. As I said, I don't do this very often, so I do think it was important, and it was really nice to just stretch my brain in this way. So I moved across the picture and then I come back just to add in more details and more layers of the graphite. I'm trying to keep things nice and loose. I didn't want to get too tight. You can see here where the underlayer had dried. Again, we've got that lovely texture, and I'm just going in with a bit more of a thicker paintbrush, so it's quite loaded with the graphite. It does dry quite shiny, so there's like a sparkle to it, which is natural with graphite, but if you're not sure on that, I don't think it's too bad when it's quite diluted, but it does show through, especially when you put it to the light. But I really love how this came together. Here's an example where I didn't let it dry, but it's amazing the tonal range that you can get with this, and I really, really did enjoy creating this study. Going forward, I really want to test this out plein air. So as I said, I really like the format of the tin, so I definitely want to do more plein air work. That was one of my 2025 resolutions anyway, but I would like to push myself, especially with this one medium. But I also want to test it out with other things, so I really want to use it in my style alongside some of my painty sketchbook work. So obviously I did do the test with the acrylic, but I do want to try it with using my gouache as my base and then using this as my darker tone. So I think that would be really fun to test out. Obviously, as you saw, I do have to be careful with it mixing in, but I think it would work really well just to have maybe one colour gouache and then create with this and use this as my darker tones. But I also think it would be fun to just have it on top of my usual mixed media. So I feel like there's loads of different ways I can use this medium, and I think the versatility is really good. I can't make the same marks as I can with the graphite blocks, but I do think the fact that it makes things a bit less messy is really helpful. When I use the graphite blocks, obviously my hands get filthy. My hand did get a little bit smudgy, so there was some graphite in at the end of this. So I think to counteract that, you just put some paper down on top of the page, and that helps to keep things nice and clean. So I just did a time lapse here because this did take quite a while, but I really love how it turned out. I did go on top with some dark indigo pencil just to get a little bit more of that darkness, just to get a really dark tone, and I think that finished it off really nicely. I also added in a bit of text, so I really enjoy adding journaling to my pages, so a little bit about the Roman Forum up there, and here is how it turned out. So I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. A big thank you to my patrons for their support. Without them, I wouldn't be able to create these free YouTube videos every week, so a shout out to them and a big thank you to you for watching. Hope you enjoyed watching this one. It is a little bit different, but let me know what you think of the ArtGraf down below in the comments. I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later.